tubes. Oh, it's good to be back at the shop. Let me tell you something. We're busy on the green Jeep right now, which is the FROGZ project. You probably saw some pictures of that on the Instagram, on the Facebook page. We put the new wheels on it, and we're about to start tube work. So with this episode on the channel, I want to go through a little bit of tube cage construction with you guys. There's a lot of welding. It's kind of tube bending, fitment, and there's some tricks that I've kind of developed over the years that I'm sure everybody else is using as well, that just seem to make sense to me, and I wanted to share them with you guys. So we're going to dig into the messy bench right now and take a look at some tube work construction for these little Jeeps. So this is the FROGZ truck. Nice license plate there, gives it away. And what we're doing is trying to recreate some tube work here. So let me just set up the camera so I can kind of show that off to you. I think this might work here. Hang on a minute. Newsstand and all that junk. That's not horrible. Alright. So I had this pattern here that I used on my 2015 white skeleton Jeep build. You guys would probably remember that off the channel. And the way that this thing works is it's designed to tie into the doorpost right here and then go up and over into the top of the windshield and then around to the very back. And there's a crossbar that goes up in the middle, and it's, you know, around the seats and stuff. So you actually get the Sorca cage points for it. I'll show you how that actually sits on the vehicle here. So let me just drop this in here. And if I can, hang on a minute. I made this so it fits down in between the dash and captures the entire windscreen. There we go. So let me see if I can show that off now. I'm not a professional here, so sorry for the video. So you can see here it just ties into the back where the roof points of contact are. So there's a screw hole there that we're going to use. We're going to use this one. And then it's designed to go up and over. Gives you a nice safety profile for the side view. It looks good. And then right here, where there used to be a screw hole attached, we actually use a soldering iron to burn in basically a dimple in here. And then we did it again down here on the door pillar. So the screw point is actually right at the bottom. I think I can still get this off and show you. Yep. So right here you can see we use a soldering iron to change the way the plastic was shaped here, so it goes around the tube. And then we did it again right here at the dash with the soldering iron. And then you can use this hinge point that comes up from the bottom, drill it through from the top, and then put a screw in from the bottom, and it'll go right into the tube. So a 3mm screw, and that sits like right there. So basically what you've got is a cage work that will attach in front of the cabin, and all the way around there'll be a crossbar here, and then at the very back. So it's a full 3 connections per side, crosses over the gap in the frame so that you've got a really strong underbody. And it also allows you to tie into the window pillars, so when you get hit from the top down, it's got support. Big deal. So let's get into the tube work now. First things first, you need a tube bender. That seems like the obvious thing, but what I've done here is I've taken this solid wall. It's not a welded wall. It's a solid piece of steel tube. It's extruded this exact way. It's not a rolled and welded kind of a thing. So that's a solid tube. It's important that you have a tube in my mind because it's a lot lighter, and also this is 3/16 OD, And that means that with a 35 wall or a 40 wall or whatever this is, you actually get the exact hole size for a metric 3 screw. Very handy. And so I take a straight piece of that and I stick it in the tube bender like this, and then that comes down so I can bend it around this corner radius here. And what I've done is I've actually marked it all out. So I've got, I marked out the edges, the centers, and the other edge of each of the radiuses on my test piece here. And then I transcribe that onto the piece of straight tube. So before they get bent, I draw out all the lines on it. And the way that you do that is you start at one end, you know, leave extra at the end always so you have some room for extra cutting if you need it. And start it here, and then as I rolled this over the main tube, I would mark where the lines were, okay? So you can keep rolling this tube over and you mark the lines, mark this line, and then you roll that tube over and you mark the next line. You get the idea. So it works really well if you do it on a flat surface like this. Mark them all out. And then when you stick this in here to bend it, you just hold this thing here beside it so that when you're bending it on the line, you line up the line with the edge of the radius on the bender. And then when you pull this down, you just pull it down to the same amount. You can totally see that if you look on it sideways. It's really easy to do. So that's the method. And then what you end up with is a whole group of copies. And they actually turn out pretty accurate. It's surprising. So then I got this piece of plywood out, which was bigger than the whole entire cage. And the reason is because I have other pieces of tube that I'm going to use to go across the center section, around the back of the seats, different types of tube. And I want to be able to have enough room on here to map each one of those tubes. So I took my template tube here and I set it up with 3 points so that when I hold the tube into the template, I can see if it's kind of getting close, right? And they're never exactly the same. But according to the template, which I drew out here with a little fine tip Sharpie, I can now add on any one of these others, and I can see on 3 points how it matches up to the shape and how it matches up to the endpoints. If the radiuses are too much or too little, I can just bend them slightly by hand to match them. But the other thing that's really cool about this is now I have just enough material here on the screw heads that I can stack these and kind of get a visual on how they look when they're all together. Because obviously they're going to be made in sets, right? So I'm making a full cage for this Jeep and then one spare so that I have another one that I can drop on in case I have like body damage or I have to do a redo, or in this case I'm going to give it to my painter for his Jeep so we have matching cages. Now I can see the profile of all of these at the same time. So I find this little tool to be really handy. And one of the things that's so important about it is you want to be able to cut off the end of the tube all exactly the same. So you can see it right here. There's the end of the tube. I've got a black line where this tube actually, my template one, actually ends. And you can see it there. So it ends right here. And I've left the other ones a little too long on purpose. So what I can do now is actually just go along with a marker and put a line all the way up both ends of these so that I know on the forward end and the aft end I've got the exact amount of tube that I need to make the height of the cage even along all of the pieces. That makes sure I have a left and a right that's actually going to be the same. So it's quite easy to do this if you have some kind of a little template like this that you can make up where you can stack tubes, and also where you can draw out what your template is supposed to be. So I have a couple options for repeating this. I can actually keep my template tube for the last 6 years like I did this time. Or I can keep the template forever, and then I have the profile and I have some way to measure it and stack parts and check. So I'm really excited to have this kind of made up, and as we go along with the tube work, we're going to keep adding the other pieces of tube onto this template so that it's easy to reproduce. You can see how well those actually turned out using that method of bending. So they're really, really similar. And there was no fancy jigging with that either. It was just I used this in the vise here so I could easily control it and watch at the same time. And they turned out really well. So I think you guys might be able to use that at your place too. So now they're all cut to the same length on the tips. And you can see how they actually turned out pretty accurate. So the side profile of each of these cages should be pretty much dead on. It's not exact, but I mean that's really close. So pretty happy with that. And now we're going to start on the upright tubes that go across the center. So we're going to go through the center hoop now. It looks like this. This is the template here. Same story. I just added 3 more stops into my board so I could trace out the template. And then we're going to take this and map it onto this shaft here. And I'm going to do the whole thing here to show you, so it's real easy. I'm going to mark up where the squares are, where the edges are that are the 90 degrees. So what you can do also is take a quick square like this and just stick it in there and line up the edges here. It's really easy. And then the best thing to do is just as soon as you see this actually curving here, you can mark it, because that's the edge of the curve, right? Right here where it starts to bend. And if I look at the measurement here, I've got a measurement of what appears to be just less than 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to mark a short 3/4 of an inch on each one of these corners. There's one. And then I can turn it like this. Mark these ones. Just a short 3/4. This one is a short 3/4. Okay, so I've got my corners marked out. And then I'm going to trace that onto the straight shaft here, so when we bend this up, we get a good reading. I'm going to make an extra here, so what I'm going to do first is actually mark the end with an X on the tube, so that this end is just long and I know it's just extra. And then, sorry about that. And line that up, and then I'm going to mark the tube for the first bend. So there's my line on my setup piece. There's my bend. And I'm going to just roll this over as if these pieces were, you know, like on land, as if it was a wheel. So I'm going to roll this one over like this. Like that. So, and that went pretty well in my estimation, so I'm going to mark that. And then I'm going to mark this end here, which is still easily visible on the straight. I'm going to roll this edge and mark that again. And what you're trying to do is just imagine that this is a car tire that's rolling on the ground. So the outside edge of your radius here, you just roll that like a car. You just roll it on there like this. Because you have to compensate for the actual bend, right? And then this end here, on that edge of the line, I'm going to mark the end where you cut it and a little extra, so I know how far to cut. I want to be able to make sure that when I put it in the truck, I can level it on each side and just make sure it's perfect. This is not an exact science doing it this way, so that's how I'm going to cut the tube up. The next thing is to stick it in the vise over here, the blue bender, get it bent. So let me cut that and I'll come right back and we'll do the bending. So the 90-degree one is really easy because we're just going to go straight 90 and we can tune it with the carpenter square. So first of all, I'm going to take this first bend line here, which I've got. I'm going to mark a 1/2 inch on each side of my bend line because as you saw, we had the top of the curve and then we went around and did the bottom of the curve, and this is actually the middle line. So now that I have the middle, I'm going to mark an exact 1/2 inch on each side. That is the radius that I'm using, so I can get a more exact measurement by doing that. I'm going to draw those out, and then on this end I'm going to do the same thing. And these lines will correspond, they should correspond with the lines that you drew on the radius like this. They should be the same as that. So what I've done is I actually took those two lines, I estimated the halfway point on the tube, and then I marked an exact 1/2 inch. So we're going to stick this in here like that, and the line on the outside of the radius is this part here. So that line and that line will match. Okay, that's how I'm doing that. And then this is going to roll over to that line. So we're going to bend this thing down at 90 degrees. I got lots of extra here. You ready? Get that lined up. And we're just going to roll that right over at 90. And that looks pretty close to 90, so we'll go with that for now. And you should actually, if you have the same kind of a mark on yours that I do, then you should actually be able to see there's a line there for the 90. There's a line here for the 45, and they're basically close to the center line that I have set up here, the 45. And the line here that I marked for the other end of my radius, it's pretty much on that. This thing is a little sloppy, as you can see, but you get the idea. We're getting there. It's not exact science, but it's pretty dang good. Now, this one, we're going to do one extra step when we do the other side. Line this up so it's ready to bend right there on the line. But now, I'm going to go on the side here, and I'm going to look down the side this way. So, let me show you. What you want is this tube, the other end of the bend, you want it to go straight up and down. It has to be in line with your handle. Okay, so there's the solid piece of the handle right there. And I'm going to make sure that this isn't like, like that. I want this thing to be like straight down. So when I do my second bend on the cage, they're both actually going to be in line with each other, straight down. So as best that we can. So let me go for that. And then we'll bend that down another 90. Like that. That looks pretty good. And now we have something that we can fit into our template and see what's up with that side of it. And we'll just check this here and see how that went. So we went a little wide on this bend here. For some reason we got a little wide on it. I'm not sure why that is. You can see here that there's a bit of a gap on this side. We can probably compensate for that without trying very hard by just changing the angles of the tube slightly. So we've gone just a tiny bit wide here on the template. See that? It's almost straight down, so that's nice. It's almost parallel. And we can bend that. We can make these line up really nicely just by giving them a twist like this. And then make sure they lay flat on the board. Go a little bit further. Almost. Look at that. So now these are parallel. They seem to sit pretty nice. It's flat on the board. So this now is going to sit better on the truck. And all we have to do now is get the length of the tubes right. I really want to have these two matching each other, so I think I might actually bend this down a little farther and straighten it out. And I'm going to do a little adjustment on that on the bender here, and then we'll retry it and see if we can get it to line up. And that was about it for that. So all I did was I pushed it a little farther here and I pulled it down here. So there's the new top bar. Obviously too long. So what I'm going to do now is let me just make sure I didn't change it too much here. A little bit more. There we go. So what I'm going to do now is put this on the quick square here, and I can see pretty clearly that I'm not square on this side. So I'm going to give that a little bit of a bend by hand to just tighten it up. Too much. I want it to be as close to square as I can before I cut it. That's better. And after a couple of bends, this tube becomes a little easier to tweak. The first couple of bends are really hard to do, and then it just gets a little bit easier. So that's actually really nice for fine tuning. So now I've got it square on both sides, and I'm going to cut it off. I've got a line marked here on my quick square for the total length that I need. If you want to see it by visual here, I'll put the extra template piece on, and there's where you want it to cut right here. So I'm going to use my mark here and mark this out like that, and then I'm going to cut off the tube and we'll install it in the Jeep. I've cut this now, so you can see here that I'm in the template and I'm pretty much right where I want to be on the length, so that's good. We can compare the two and just make sure that we're not totally crazy on the sizing. The spacing looks really good. I like it. So this should fit right in the Jeep. We're going to move this down here and bring this over. See if I can get that positioned in there. We're going to use this mounting hole here, so we should be able to fit this into those mounting holes right there. Just pop it right in and then rotate the tube around and get it to sit underneath the top bar, with the top bar actually still making contact at the back here. And I'm noticing right away that this one has come out. You see that? So what's happening is on this side, this is why this is not quite an exact science. On this side here, this tube is a little bit longer than the one on the other side. Not by much, but a little bit. And it's lifting up this back bar here. So I'm going to cut this tube down just a tiny bit to try to see if I can get this to lay flat and not bump into the camera too much. So I'm going to chop this down just a tiny bit. So I cut this end off right here, and I should be able to now fit this in with a better top rail fitment. Push that down into the body and then realign all these. Alright, I think we got a winner here now. So there we go. Now I really like to do this testing and setup with the front bars already in down to the front posts. Nothing is screwed on. There's no attachment point here yet. But what it does is the windshield capture here and the dashboard, and then having this front piece kind of put on top, push down. What you get is this capture for this top tube that it can't flop around all over the place. So it makes this setup a lot easier to measure and check. And now I know exactly where these welds are going to be. And we're going to use brass on this one. So we're going to do what's called brazing. And we're not going to do a brazing tutorial, but I want you to be able to see kind of how you can do the gap filling with the brazing. So we'll go over that here in just a second. So we're going to start this with some special tools. Water bottle full of water. I'm using an oxygen and MAP gas combination for my welding. It's a gas torch. You're going to use a brazing rod, which is brass, and then a garbage can. And the reason is because the cage, once you have it in the shell, I'm making 2 of these so I can just do it right on the truck. You're going to remove most of the seats, remove whatever you can that's in the way so it doesn't get hot with the torch. And then you're going to heat up just the one area with the torch really close. Get the brass rod in there as fast as you can and blend it all around on both sides like this. And then hit it with a half a bottle of water and just dump the water all over the tube work. And that'll cool it down really fast so that it doesn't melt the plastic underneath or up in the front. Very important to do this. And that's why you have a garbage can, because all that water just runs out the doors like a real Jeep right onto the ground. And then when that's cooled off, you can start on this side, do a little bit of heat on both sides, and then put your brass in on both sides. And as soon as you've got the brass in there to do the joint and fill it all in and blend it nicely with the heat, dump the rest of the water bottle on it, all the tube work all the way around. Make sure you cool that off as fast as possible, and your garbage can will collect all the rest of the water. So I just finished this one, and that's looking pretty fantastic. And the brass goes all the way around. You don't have to get it in the bottom. If you keep it hot, it'll actually just blend itself and right around the corners. And now I've got a garbage can full of water instead of dumping it on my floor, and my tube is cold. I don't have to worry about melting the body. It works real good. So after you're done putting the cage together, then you can go through these little corners here, and from the bottom add an M3 screw. You'll have to check the length. I ended up with a 12mm screw on this side, and I think a 10 on this side, because the curve is not quite the same on each one. And you want to get the longest screw that you can in there. In these ones here, I can usually get like a 25mm screw in there, as long as there's thread all the way down the screw. Sometimes a 20 is enough. The more that you get in, the better that you have for kind of like thread bite traction, because they're not actually threaded tubes. You're just counting on the dirt, or not dirt, but you're counting on the imperfections on the inside of the tube to grab the threads of the screw. So put in the longest one that you can. On the front, if you keep the doors, then you can leave it just like this. You still have all the support that you need for the windscreen. If you decide you're going to get rid of the doors, then you can drill a hole from the top down and then put your screw in up from the inside over here, and that'll go right into the tube work. So that's how we're going to do it. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video and got a little bit of information on doing your own tube work. I'm going to finish up this one here on the green Jeep right now, and then we're off. So that's tube work for these little two-door skeleton Jeeps. If you guys have any questions or comments or anything you want to add to the video, please do that in the comment section. And be sure to share it around in your groups, and we'll catch you on the next one. Just like that. We'll get some paint on her.